Thanks for joining me today to talk about the U.S. knowledge of Western free-roaming horses. My name is Nikki Fry, and I'm joining you today representing the Utah State University Extension. This study is a collaboration with several different professors, including Jeff Beck, Terry Messmer, Derek Skasta, Loretta Singletary, and Lara Snell. We're talking with you today because horses are at or above carrying capacity in many of our Western herd management areas and territories. Getting them back to carrying capacity and maintaining a sustainable management in the future is going to be difficult, requiring many hard decisions. More importantly, it's going to require public support. We don't really know much about what the public knows or would be willing to support. There's a few different surveys that we can use to get some information. The public policy polling in 2017 surveyed 556 registered voters. They asked 4 questions about the public support for mass slaughter and 1 question about the support of contraceptives. The American Wild Horse Campaign sent 10 questions to 30 political candidates, asking them about their support for euthanasia, contraceptives, and managing horses in holding facilities. Looking further afield, a study in Australia determined that the public would support lethal control for non-native species before they would support lethal control for native species. We have 2 studies coming out of our Western universities recently. A master's student polled 145 respondents about their support for different management options and found that by and large, the public is supportive of managing free-roaming horses, but how you shape that message determines how much support you might get. And then finally, a Utah State University survey of students, faculty, and staff polled 842 respondents, asking them more than 40 questions about knowledge and opinion. So summarizing all that information, we realized that we don't know much about what the public wants. We either have small sample sizes that just ask a few questions, or larger sample sizes that ask a lot of questions, but to a small segment of society. To get our handle on the status of horse management in the United States, ag experiment stations and extension service across the Western University got together to create what's considered a rapid response team. And we're tasked with coming up with some information and reporting on that information within 2 or 3 years. We created a subcommittee that would conduct a national survey. Each expert on that subcommittee was assigned 1 or 2 topics from what you see here on the right-hand side, and wrote 10 questions per topic. We had the subcommittee review and suggest edits, and basically boiled down 100 questions to 35 questions. So right from the start, we knew we'd be leaving out questions for the future that we really wanted to know, but we needed to keep the survey under 15 minutes, which is all you can really expect a respondent to pay attention to. And for this presentation today, we're going to be discussing the knowledge questions and save those opinion questions for a later date. Once we were done with the subcommittee edits, we did ask the entire rapid response team to provide suggestions and edits, and then took that draft to Qualtrics. Qualtrics is an online surveying platform that was going to conduct the survey for us, and they edited the survey to make sure there's no bias in the way we worded our questions or in the types of responses we provided in our multiple choice questions. They made sure that the average person could answer that survey within 15 minutes and that we were using common language. For more information on how Qualtrics works, you can scan that QR code in the bottom right-hand corner, and it takes you to a website that gives you a little bit more information on how we did the survey. Qualtrics maintained all the responses coming in and did some quality control on them. So they eliminated those surveys that were completed in less than 5 minutes, those whose ages were under 18 years old, and any spurious answers, like, for example, people that just selected A in response to all the questions. Our goal was 400 respondents in 5 regions of the United States, or a total of 2,000 respondents. In the end, we had a sample size of 3,177 respondents. You can see here that we met the mark of 400 respondents in each of our regions, except for the Southwest, where we got close, but not totally. Our age and our income demographics paralleled what the 2020 census found, and that was on purpose. We actually asked Qualtrics to continue to conduct the survey until we had this range of age and income. You'll quickly see that we have more males and females that conducted the survey. We also provided responses such as non-binary, prefer not to respond, or other for gender. However, there was only 17 responses that were those 3 selections. So for the rest of our study, we'll just be talking about the sexes of male and female. But for future surveys, we're going to continue allowing for other gender choices and hope that that representation will increase in the future. For each one of these demographics, we conducted a chi-square analysis against every single question that we asked. And we found that there were some associations for the questions and these demographics, including region, but the strength of the associations were extremely weak. So a power of association that is greater than 0.5 is considered strong. For all of our associations that were significant, our lambda was less than 0.01. So that's an extremely weak association. With an association like that, we can't make any correlations amongst these demographics to predict or explain any of the results. So it's best that we pull them together to discuss them. We've been asked whether or not we stratified by rural and urban, and we didn't, and that was on purpose. Past research indicated that it's not where a person lives, but how they live in their environment that influences their interest in natural resources and environmental subjects. So, for example, you may live in a rural environment but work in the city, or vice versa. You may work in the city but spend all of your free time in a rural environment. That's more important than where your house is situated. And this was supported by the recent survey conducted by Utah State University. So we purposely did not stratify by that demographic. We did ask a few environmental attitude questions. These questions will be more important when we're talking about opinions, but it's important that you understand the attitudes of our public coming into this survey. So in general, our respondents agree that using scientific research is the best way to solve environmental problems. They also see that our federal public lands are an important part of our nation's economy, so they have a utilitarian value. But they also have an aesthetic value, that just the fact that they exist is an important value to our public. And then finally, the respondents trust the scientists working for the U.S. government to manage our public lands. So let's go into what our public knows. Keep in mind as we go forward that we're talking about our everyday person. These are people who probably aren't scientists, biologists, or environmentalists, and they often live or work in urban environments. Maybe they recreate outside on the weekends. But these are our people. Most of our U.S. public is urban, and these are the people that we need to understand. When we're working day to day on free-roaming horse conflicts, we often come in contact with our rural residents, our ranchers, our recreationists, and we feel like we have a handle on what they know and think. But it's the other public, the majority of the public, that we don't know and we don't understand. It's this basic public that's reading social media blasts and online news articles without any experience with which to filter that information. And these are the people that we need to focus our outreach efforts on. So these following slides are going to say, well, what is their baseline knowledge? Where do we go from here? First, we ask them if they lived in a state that manages free-roaming horses on public lands. So essentially, are they actually aware that there are free-roaming horses out there? The Southeast, the Northeast, the Midwest, they don't really have free-roaming horses on federal public lands, but they do have free-roaming horses on state lands, particularly like the Barrier Islands in the Southeast. And there's some private reserves and private holdings that would have free-roaming horses. So those people that indicated yes from the Southeast, the Northeast, and the Midwest, they may not be wrong. I struggle to think that 20% of our respondents are from that pool, but it is possible. What's alarming are the number of people in the West and the Southwest, so more than 40%, that didn't know whether or not they lived in a state that manages free-roaming horses on public lands. In the West, the only states that don't have free-roaming horses are Oregon and Washington. So there's a darn good chance that our respondents were actually living in a state that had free-roaming horses. And so this is bad, actually, that they don't know that there's free-roaming horses on their lands. We went a little bit further and said, okay, well, which of the Western U.S. states have free-roaming horses? 30% of our respondents did not know which states. And we said you could select all that apply or select I don't know. And so some of them did. Some of them made a wild guess, but also selected I don't know. I have the states organized by the number of herd management areas or territories in parentheses. It is really interesting that 40% of our respondents indicated that Montana had free-roaming horses, but only 25% of our respondents could indicate that Nevada had free-roaming horses, and Nevada has 96 herd management areas and territories on them. Now this number in parentheses does not include tribal nations or state lands. So this is just our federal lands. So we see that the American public does not really have a handle on where in our nation these horses are. We also ask them, what do these lands look like? So what are rangelands? Are they desert, forest, grassland, shrubs, or do you just not know? And here they could select which ones they felt were appropriate. For you today, I stratified this by whether or not people thought that they lived in a place with free-roaming horses, because I thought that those that lived in a state with free-roaming horses might understand what the habitat in that state looks like. And most people selected grasslands, which is actually very much incorrect. If you were to put a red box around where most of our free-roaming horses are in the West, they're in ecoregions designated as deserts and shrublands, Mediterranean forests, woodlands, and scrubs, and temperate conifer forests. So those people that lived in a state with free roaming horses were more likely to select deserts and forests, but by and large, people were incorrectly suggesting that horses live in grasslands. So now I'm perceiving a public that is envisioning horses running through tall grass prairies in Montana. And I'm wondering if this is because they're watching too much Yellowstone on Netflix, or is it the Marlboro Man commercials from the 70s and 80s? I don't know, but we can tell that there are definite differences in reality and perception with our public. Because of this study that was conducted in Australia about the support for non-natives versus native species, we asked this question about whether or not horses in North America were native. Most scientists will say that modern horses were introduced to North America by European explorers and colonists. There was a native species about 10,000 years ago, but that species was extirpated. And during the time between that extirpation and when horses were reintroduced, horses became domesticated for thousands of years. So that species is different when it came back to North America. We found that 35% of the public did indicate this response, but that means that 65% of the population did not know the correct answer. So this is going to influence how the public is going to support management actions in the future. We also asked whether or not the public knew how many horses were out there in our herd management areas and territories. A lot of times when the government creates an act to protect a species, it's because that species is endangered or there's some sort of conservation issue with those species. So if our public is thinking that there's only 10,000 horses out there, they might be very concerned with any kind of action that decreases that population. We found that more than 40% of our public responded that they didn't know. So they didn't even hazard a guess. They just straight up said, I don't know. Less than 10% of our population indicated correctly that there's more than 75,000 horses in our herd management areas today. So that is a massive knowledge gap when we're talking about strategies to decrease carrying capacity. People don't even understand how many horses are out there. So that's definitely an avenue for education in the future. When we're talking about strategies to control populations, it's important that the public understands how populations are increasing. So we asked the quick question of how many babies can a female horse have in a year? About 40% of our population correctly indicated that a healthy female horse can give birth to a foal every year. Some people would actually say that even an unhealthy female horse can give birth to a foal every year. So we need to get to that 30% that were clearly wrong and help those that didn't even want to venture a guess. So when we're making talks about population ecology and carrying capacity and how quickly we're running out of rangelands, we need to remember that 60% of our respondents don't understand and are not following along with the importance of this carrying capacity and reproductive situation. We asked a couple questions to gauge how much the public understood the interactions that were happening with horses out in the landscape. So we asked the two questions of whether or not cattle and livestock are competing with horses for limited food and water, and the same for native wildlife. There were a lot more people that were ambivalent about the question of cattle and livestock than were ambivalent about the native wildlife. By and large, respondents agreed that horses are competing with native wildlife. And I would like to think that the neither segment of the population, they're ambivalent not because they don't care, but they're ambivalent because they just don't have the knowledge and the information to make an informed choice. Along with competition, we need to know about depredation. So what's controlling our free-roaming horse populations? Where's the food, how they're interacting, where's their source of mortality, etc. Only 10% of our respondents correctly indicated that there are no common predators of free-roaming horses on Western public lands. It can get a little messy because we do know that cougars sometimes, in some places, depredate free-roaming horses. But this is certainly not at a level that we would consider common. If I take a minute to talk to you about one of the opinion questions, we asked them if when rangeland conditions are allowing for starvation and dehydration, should we go in and do some sort of population control? And you can see that about 50% of the respondents said that they agreed that we should allow nature to take its course without human intervention. And at first I thought that was pretty callous, but then if you think about it in context of this question, if the majority of our respondents think that cougars are commonly depredating horses, and most of your high school ecology will tell you that predation is a way to manage populations, then maybe they're thinking that we don't really have to worry about overpopulation because our predators are going to take care of that, right? That adage of the predators killing the old and the weak and controlling excess populations. So if that's what they're thinking, then it's only natural that they would say, we don't need any intervention. We need to allow nature to take its course. So we definitely need to have some education on this, right? Because we know that that's not the case. So if we do have a situation where the government has to come in and do some control, what does the public know about these tools? We asked just a basic question about which tools the U.S. government is authorized to use to manage free-roaming horse population numbers. And they could have selected any of these. In fact, all 4 of these are legal tools to manage free-roaming horse population numbers. Again, this one can be a little bit gray because while the U.S. government is authorized to use euthanasia, there's no funding or support to use euthanasia as a population control measure. It's usually used as a mercy or humane way to remove horses that are dying and can't otherwise be saved. But you can see that about 40% of our population, rather than even guessing, just said, I don't know. So either they're ambivalent and they don't care, or they really feel like they just don't have enough knowledge to make a guess. In a better situation, we would have all 4 of these management tool options have a response level closer to 100 because all 4 of these are legal management options. So keep this in mind if we're trying to come up with a strategy of reducing overpopulated herd management areas. We're dealing with a public that doesn't understand what things are legal. So if there's a news blast that's saying that the government's rounding up horses to put them onto holding facilities, and the public doesn't even know that that's a legal move, well then of course they may be alarmed, right? So we need to understand that first we have to say, yeah, this is legal, they're authorized to do it. And maybe there might be more public support for that action. So in sum, we found that region, age, income, and gender don't really have much influence on the US public's knowledge of horses and horse management. They don't know where horses live. They don't know what they live on. They don't know how they interact with their environment. The public doesn't know the legal management options available for managing horses in herd management areas. The public doesn't understand competition and is wrong about depredation. And they're not really sure if the government is successfully managing or compassionate about horse management. And that's a slide that I didn't show you, so you'll just have to trust me on that one. I want to acknowledge my partners that helped come up with this survey: Jeff Beck, Jesse Hadfield, Terry Messmer, Mark Nelson, Derek Scasta, Loretta Singletary, Laura Snell, and Sam Smallage. And my funding was provided by USU Extension, USU Ag Experiment Station, and the University of Nevada, Reno Ag Experiment Station. If you have any more information that you need from me, you feel free to text me. There's my email address above. And then if you want to have more detailed information about any one of these questions, and to actually see more of the questions that we asked, go ahead and scan this QR code. This will lead you to the website that gives you both more detailed information about our methods and more detailed information about the responses to our knowledge questions. We'll be continuing to update this as we get papers published on the opinion questions, so that there will be a public interface for the entire survey once we're finished. Thank you for your time and attention. Have a great day.